Hello, I'm Tom Friedland. I'm president of the Berkeley City Club. I'm sitting next to my wife, Sandy, who's in charge of this evening's program. And I want to welcome all City Club members and thank you for your loyalty to the club. I'd like to talk to local Bay Area non-City Club members and invite you to consider the City Club. We have one of the best restaurants in Berkeley, Julia's. We have a swimming pool that is reminiscent of the San Simeon swimming pool. And if you don't know our beautiful Julia Morgan design building, please stop by on Durant Avenue to visit us and consider becoming a member. For those of you who are not in the Bay Area, I want to encourage you, if you come to the Bay Area, to stay at our hotel and to eat at our restaurant, Julia's. And with that, I will turn the program over to my wife, Sandy.
Good evening, everyone. So our speaker tonight, Janine Firpo, had me at hello. I first met her when I was planning a route for a walking tour of little free libraries. She and her husband, Mike, had one that matched their Rockridge home. I learned that Janine had taken the mini library with her when the couple moved to Seattle in 2013, when she went to work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. When they moved back to Oakland, the library returned with them. Who does that? Clearly, this was a woman who loved books and reading, wanted to contribute to her community, and had an impressive career. As I soon found out, there was so much more. To rattle off some terms you'll soon learn more about, Janine is a values-aligned investor, an angel investor, and a social innovator. In 2017, she left her 35-year career in technology and international development to focus on how women can create a more just and equitable society through their investments. Her brand new book is a clear, comprehensive roadmap to accomplishing that lofty goal. Her book is called, as you can see, Activate Your Money, Invest to Grow Your Wealth and Build a Better World. And some 150 women and a few men contributed to it. Reading the book feels like you have a trusted, reassuring friend giving you step-by-step expert advice. The text includes inspiring case studies, personal asides, and a useful glossary. A companion website has extensive additional resources. The book grew out of Janine's own investment journey and her desire to make certain that all her assets, from her checking and savings accounts to stocks and real estate, supported the issues that she was passionate about. And in case you're wondering, her approach did not mean sacrificing returns. Although men can certainly benefit from Janine's guidance, her intended audience clearly is women who, she notes, control more than half the personal wealth in this country, but too often have been left out of the male-dominated world of finance, or worse, stereotyped or insulted. As Janine recently tweeted, 90% of articles about money aimed at women are focused on telling us to spend less, and 73% of those focused on men are on investing and building wealth. No wonder women think we're bad with money. And guess what? We aren't. It's time to bust that myth. That's the tweet. So I'd like to rewind a bit to tell you how Janine became a values-aligned investor. In 1995, she literally walked away from her successful career in Silicon Valley, including a stint at Apple, to take a 4-month solo backpacking trip through sub-Saharan Africa. Recalling that adventure in a recent interview, she said, "I saw poverty like I'd never seen before, but I was enthralled with the countries and the people I met. I decided I wanted to shift my life to start making a difference in the world, to help solve some of the problems that I saw around me." Since then, Janine has worked to empower women and their money. She became a pioneer at using mobile phones to provide electronic payments and banking services to the most underserved populations in Africa, Southeast Asia, and beyond. At her final job at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, she and her team designed philanthropic and impact investments to alleviate poverty. Janine now is a lead investor in Next Wave Impact, an early stage equity fund that supports female founders and social businesses. And she chairs the board of Zebras Unite, a worldwide organization devoted to helping startups that are not appropriate for traditional venture capital. You should also know that Janine is donating 100% of the net income from her book to organizations that are dedicated to advancing both women's economic empowerment and values-aligned investing. So let's meet this woman who clearly practices what she preaches. Janine, you're on.
I hope so. Okay, I am. Start my video. Can everybody hear me? I came in an unusual way. So first of all, that was an amazing introduction. And I was actually going to tell a little bit of my own story during this early part of my talk, but I won't have to do that anymore because Sandy did such a beautiful job of giving you some of my background. I am really happy to be here. I look forward to speaking with all of you. And I'd actually like to start. I understand that some people on the call are actually financial advisors. So I'd like to start by just having folks type into the chat a little bit about what they're hoping they might learn tonight. And so that I can be sure that I'm crafting my comments appropriately. So if you could just take a moment and do that. And while you're typing into the chat, I will get ready to queue up my deck. I'm not seeing any chats. Nobody has anything they want to say in advance. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it would be great.
I should add that we'll have a Q&A at the end of the talk. So they'll have another chance.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just how to do due diligence for angel investments. Okay. That is a great question. Small investors. Okay. Yes. Okay. Index funds. Great. Okay. We will talk about all of these things. So let me share my screen with you and go to this. All right. I am going to assume that everyone can see my screen. So this talk is titled A New Approach to Investing for Women. And as Sandy mentioned, I really do focus on women, and I'll explain a little bit more about why I do that in a moment. But I have been told by many men that the content is for them too. So in much the same way that many books have been written for men and we as women have read them, this is just a little bit of that in reverse. So I want to show you what I'm going to be talking about. So my first intent was to tell you a little bit about my story, and I'll just fill in a little few pieces from what Sandy told you. Then I'm going to talk to you about why women and why now. I'm going to talk about what this whole thing that I call values aligned investing is and what is possible with it and how we can actually build a better world together, what that would look like. And then because this is a more sophisticated audience, I can tell that even by the questions you asked, I'm going to give you some specific examples of this type of investments in some different asset classes. So you will walk away with some ideas about how you can move some of your money into alignment with your values. So my story, and you heard a lot about it, I started out with parents, and I would imagine many of you on the call did too, who were Depression era parents. So I grew up with a lot of issues around money, a lot of questions around whether we had enough. When I was young, we didn't. As I was going into college, my parents started to build their own financial freedom. And so I've seen and lived both sides of the coin, both not having money as well as moving into a realm where we did have some more money. And that really influenced my thoughts and feelings about money from an early day. When I took that trek that Sandy had talked about, and I walked through sub-Saharan Africa, and I changed my career from high tech to really working in developing countries to address poverty. That was a big shift. And I actually took pay cuts to do that, but I really wanted my work to align with my values. And so it was really important to me that I show up in the world in a way that was in integrity with who I was. And because of the work that I was doing, and because I lived in the Bay Area, I was involved in a lot of conversations around what has become known as impact investing. And at some point about an impact investing, by and large, is directed toward high net wealth individuals, institutional investors, foundations, people with very deep pockets. And over 10 years ago, I decided that I wanted to invest all of my assets that way, even though I was not one of those things. And in the intervening period, I have had 3 different financial advisors, all of whom were values aligned advisors, all of whom told me they would get me to where I wanted to be, and none of them did. So when I retired, and I am retired, although I realized that based on the amount of work I do, I realized the only thing I really retired from was an income, but I am ostensibly retired. And when I did that, I realized that it was time to democratize the space. So much has happened in the impact investing or socially responsible investing space. There are now products that anyone can invest in, even people who don't have a lot of money, across the different asset classes, and they can invest in those without giving up their financial return. So I decided to write this book to help women figure out how to invest their values. And as I was working on the book, and I did have about 150 women and some men help me, as Sandy had mentioned, I reached out to women that I knew who were financial advisors, women who I knew were really knowledgeable in this space, to write early content for the book and to guide me. And then I rewrote everything so it was all in one voice. And I had a lot of people review the material along the way as well. But as I was going down the process, I realized how much women lack trust in our own ability to invest, and how frequently we give the authority over our money to somebody else and we don't really want to think about it. So I shifted the book a bit so that it teaches women basics of investing as well as how to put their money to work with their values. So that is really what I set out to do. So one of the things before I get started, this is actually a disclaimer that's in my book, and I'm going to make this disclaimer now, which is I am not a financial advisor. I am a person who is investing their own money this way. Everything that I'm telling you is for educational purposes. I am not giving you financial advice. I am not suggesting to you what to do. Your personal situation is your own. It's different from mine. I will be talking to you about some of the investments that I have personally made, some of the things that I'm invested in that are values aligned, but that is not an endorsement of those products, and it is not a suggestion that you should invest in those too. Everyone should do their own due diligence before they invest in anything. So I just want to make sure that this is just for educational purposes only. All right, so why women and why now? As Sandy said, women have been left out of the financial conversation. And this is just some of the statistics that show that. So the vast majority of financial advisors are men. And this is really important. Less than 1% of the investment funds that are out there are managed by women. So very, very few women are actually controlling the investment funds or the money. When women go out to raise capital, they have a very hard time doing that. In fact, of all the venture capital funds that were invested last year in this country, only 2.3% went to female CEOs. 2.3%. And even less went to females of color. So what we're seeing in the venture capital world, where we hear a lot about that in the Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area, this is basically a white male game, and women have been excluded from it. It's also very difficult for women to get loans. So one of the things that I do with Zebras Unite is really look at alternative financing models for the kinds of companies that women and people of color tend to run, and to help them get the capital they need to help those companies grow. The other thing that's interesting is when women are either divorced or widowed, 75% of them or more leave the financial advisors they have and seek a new financial advisor because they don't feel heard. So women really are looking for something very different from their financial advisors and something very different from their money than men are, and they haven't been catered to in the past. So that's why I decided to focus on women, because we are an untapped group that deserves to have the services that we want and to have the confidence that we need when we invest. So why now? Right now, according to different people have different views on the data, but we control at least a third of the money in this country, possibly up to 50%. But what everybody agrees on is that in 10 years' time, women will control the majority of money in this country. And the reason that that is the case is because of a couple of things. One is we are working, we are making our own money. Almost half of the millionaires in this country are women. And the other thing is a lot of us are in the baby boomer age. It's a big bulk of people. Men will be dying and they will be leaving those assets to the women. So women are going to ostensibly be controlling a very large amount of money. However, we're not taking personal responsibility for those assets in a lot of cases. We also have been taught very well, and Sandy alluded to this as well, we've been taught very well to save our money. And we do it. We listened, we are saving our money. But the problem is we are saving on average 70 cents on the dollar in cash, which means that we are not growing our wealth. In fact, that money is losing value year on year because of inflation. It's not even keeping up with inflation. So we are afraid to invest. We keep our money in cash, and it's actually putting us at risk because our income generating years tend to be about a decade shorter than men's because of the childbearing that we do. And we're living longer than men. So we actually have longer lifespans and we have less earning power to keep us going in our retirement years. So these are very important that we start thinking more about our money and investing our money and doing that earlier. And just to note, in my book, I actually dedicate my book to my mother because she taught me a lot about investing. And I think that a lot of us grew up without that kind of guidance. In fact, I've met young women whose fathers have taught their brothers how to invest, but they're not teaching the girls. So I feel like it's important for women to learn this kind of information, not just for ourselves, but for our daughters, for our granddaughters, for our nieces, for the younger women that we come in contact with to help them be more aware. Only 9% of us believe that we would be better investors than men. And yet when we do invest, the research shows that we outperform men. So there's no reason for us not to have confidence. We're completely capable of investing. And when we invest and put our money to work in the things that we care about, things like our local community, supporting other women, having a healthy, sustainable planet for our children and grandchildren, and supporting the companies that are building products and services that are designed for us, when we put our money to work for those things, and if enough of us do that, we can literally change the economy. Our money is big enough and important enough, and where money goes, power flows. We can create a more sustainable and equitable economy with our money. So there's tremendous amount of potential. There's tremendous amount of potential for what we can do with our assets. This is a quote from Melinda Gates that I very much believe in. And I also put this in the book. So she talks about the power and potential that happens when money flows into hands of women who have the authority to use it. And she says everything changes, and I think it's true. And it's true because we invest differently than men. We have different priorities than men. We approach risk differently than men. There are many ways in which we prefer to learn together than learn alone. There are many ways in which our approach to investing in general is different than men, and yet we're not offered the opportunities to invest that way. And so I and the women that are working with me are trying to change that. Okay, so what is this thing that I call values-aligned investing? It is been known by many different names, and you might have heard some of these things like impact investing, sustainable investing, socially responsible investing. You may have heard of ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. These are all different words that define the kind of investing that I'm talking about. But when you talk to anybody about what those words mean, everybody seems to have a different point of view. I use the term values aligned investing because I believe that our investments are very personal. And the things that you choose to invest in, the way you choose to allocate your assets, that is personal to you. The values that you have are personal to you. The things that I choose to invest in and the values that I try to articulate through my money may not be exactly the same as yours. So I refer to this as values aligned investing. When I talk about it, and the goal that I have with my own money is to move every single dollar from the stuff that I have in my savings and checking account to this, what's in the stock market, fixed income, private investing, real estate, everything into alignment with my values. So I'm going full throttle. It doesn't mean that everybody else has to, and there are many ways that you can get involved in this in many different levels that you can work with your own investments. This diagram gives you a little bit of a sense of how this kind of investing sits relative to the investing that we traditionally think about. So traditionally, we have had something called two-pocket thinking. So what we think is that in one pocket, we have all the capital that we want to invest to maximize return. And in the other pocket, we put the money that we're going to use to do good in the world, the money that we're going to use for charity or philanthropy. So we have some money to grow our wealth and some money to do good in the world. The challenge with that is that the pool of money that we have to do good in the world usually dwarfs is usually much, much smaller than the money that we have that we're investing to maximize our financial return. And the question that we really have to ask is, what is the impact that that money that we're using to maximize our financial return is having in the world? We don't usually think about that, but every dollar we invest is having an impact of some sort. And the question really is that impact something that aligns with your values, or is it something that is in opposition to your values? And my guess would be that many of your investments are actually in opposition to your values. So what values aligned investing is it's really a new way of thinking that integrates the best of the rigor and the thinking of traditional investing and the financial analysis of traditional investing with the goal and the desire to do well. It brings those two together into a completely new form of investing. It's sort of like the biological equivalent is an ecotone, where you have two different environmental constructs that come together to create something new. And a great example of that are tidal pools. So tidal pools exist where you have the sea meeting the land, and it creates a completely different environmental habitat. And this is the same kind of thing. And there are different levels of impact that you can have within values aligned investing. You can start at the earliest, where you just take things out of your investment portfolio so you do no harm. You can then move to something called benefit stakeholders, where you're actually being very thoughtful about the kinds of companies that you're investing in to make sure they're doing the right things in terms of the environment, the right things in terms of governance, the right things in terms of diversity, et cetera. And the third level is to invest in companies that are actually developing solutions and innovating solutions. So different levels of impact. There's a lot of mythology out there about this kind of investing, and I want to address that now, because I think that it is really important to recognize these myths. The first thing that we are told, and many of our financial advisors will tell us, you do not want to invest that way because you will give up financial return. This is not true. Normally, when people are talking about that, they're talking about the stock market. There have been a range of studies that have been done over decades looking at this question. One example is a study that Morgan Stanley did of 10,000 1,000 mutual funds over a 7-year period. And they found in that study that the sustainable investments actually did as well as or outperformed the traditional investments on average. There's a whole wealth of studies, as I mentioned, and you can find them referenced in my book, and they are also referenced on the companion website. So the belief that you have to give up financial return isn't true. It often only applies to one asset class, and even in that asset class, it is not the case. Another thing that we hear often is that this is a fad, that it's going to go away. I don't believe that's true either. In 2019, 1 out of every $4 that institutional or professional investors were investing were being invested in sustainable companies. 1 out of 4, 2019. The following year, 1 out of 3. So we are seeing tremendous growth in this space. We're hearing about it more and more, and it is becoming more accepted that thinking about the globe, thinking about the externalities that companies have to face, and recognizing that those externalities have an impact on the profitability of the company is becoming more accepted in the financial sector. The third thing that we often hear is that it's too difficult to invest this way. And I don't really believe that either. I think investing writ large is difficult. I don't believe in the philosophies of the 5 easy things to do, five easy steps to investment. That is not my investment approach. I think investing is a skill. You build it over time, and it's more like a marathon than a sprint. It's something you have to learn. You get better at it over time. And adding the additional piece of looking for values aligned investments does not add that much more work to the whole process. So I don't believe in many of these myths. And if you have other things that you've heard, we can talk about that later. So let me give you some examples of actual investments. I'm going to start with cash. So many of us don't really think about where our cash is invested. We probably have a bank, often a large bank. It's a legacy of ours to have that bank. And we don't know where the money is. It's sort of like a black box. We don't know what they do with our capital. And chances are you would not like some of what is done with your capital. It's often used for the financial economy. It isn't usually used for the sustainable or the real economy or the local economy. I made a decision to move all of my assets out of larger banks into smaller local banks. So I have money in a bank in Oakland called Beneficial State Bank. Some of you might have heard about it. I also have capital in a bank called the Self-Help Federal Credit Union. When I was researching and writing the chapter on cash, I actually opened bank accounts at 4 different banks, not because I thought that was a good idea, but because I wanted to test the process. I wanted to see what it took. I opened an online only account. I opened all these bank accounts. I've consolidated most of them, but the process was not that difficult. Took a little bit of time, but it was not that difficult. And I now feel really good about where my money is and what my money is supporting. So I'm going to give you an example of what happened with my money at Self-Help Federal Credit Union. And the thing to realize is these alternative financial institutions, and there are many, many of them, and I explain in the book how you can find them and how you can find financial institutions that are close to you or that support the things you care about. You can find financial institutions that are supporting Native American Indians or that are supporting Black communities or that are supporting climate change or that are supporting small farmers and on and on and on. And you can easily find these online. But in this particular example, Brighter Beginnings, and some of you might actually know about this organization. It's a nonprofit organization based here in the East Bay. And they serve the poor of Contra Costa and Alameda counties. And they've been doing that since 1984. Well, when COVID came, because they depend to a great degree on state funds, they lost a lot of their income. And they had a lot of other challenges during COVID that almost put them out of business. So the CEO of this organization went to her bank, which she had been banking with for over a decade, to ask them to help her get a PPP loan. And they told her no. that she was not qualified to get that loan. So she shifted her assets to Self-Help Federal Credit Union, and Self-Help Federal Credit Union gave her the loan that she needed to keep the organization from going under. So, and they gave her the loan because she's the kind of business that's very in keeping with the kind of work that they do. They are supporting women and underserved populations in our local community, and they are helping them get loans for businesses, for nonprofit organizations, for homes, for student loans, etc. And so when I hear about these kinds of stories, and I do get information from Self-Help telling me what they're investing in, it actually makes me feel great. I'm really happy to know that in a little way, I contributed to the success of this organization because I bank at Self-Help Federal Credit Union. So that's one example with cash. I could give you others, but that's one example. Within fixed income, there are many ways that you can play in fixed income. So you can get certificates of deposit, you can invest in some of these small financial institutions and help them have the loan capital that they need to on-lend. There are different types of community notes that you can invest in. But when many of us think about fixed income, we think about bonds, and you can buy individual bonds, you can buy bond funds that are publicly available on the stock market, and you can buy bond funds that are privately available through your financial advisor. There are values aligned alternatives in every single one of these categories. And you can get a variety of different kinds of bonds that are values aligned. An SRI bond is one that screens out companies, or a bond fund would be one that screens out companies that are in certain industries that some of us think of as sin industries or that we don't want to have our assets in. There are green bond funds that are being put together specifically to fund environmentally friendly projects. There are sustainable bonds that are going into environmental and socially responsible projects, impact bonds that are being used to create a positive social good like low-income housing or affordable housing and so on. And there are even some blue bonds that are coming into the market now that are to save the oceans. So there's a variety of different bonds and bond funds, and more of these are coming online all the time. So there are a variety of opportunities, and I'm going to tell you about one of the things that I have done is I invest in individual bonds. So I play around a lot with my money. So I experiment a lot with my money, and I'll invest in different types of things to see what happens and to see what it's like and to learn, because I want to learn myself so that I can share my experience with other people. So I'm invested a little bit in many things. I wouldn't necessarily suggest my strategy for most people, but I have invested in some individual bonds. And one of the individual bonds that I'm in is the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital that some of you may be familiar with. It's over in the Palo Alto area, and it provides acute pediatric and obstetric care to patients that are in terminal illnesses or very, very sick young children. So this hospital put out a bond in 2016 to raise money for renovations and expansion and to create more space for the families of these poor sick children to stay in while their children are at the hospital. And I bought some of this bond, and it was really meaningful to me because, first of all, I feel like I'm getting a good return. But it was also really meaningful to me because my mother used to donate money to the Ronald McDonald House and to this hospital. And so I feel that I am, through owning this bond, I am continuing that legacy. But I'm not doing it through grant donations. I'm doing it through an investment choice that is giving me a positive return. So that's another thing that I've done, and it makes me feel really great. Another example of a socially responsible fixed income is a company called Invesco has bond portfolios. And these are bond funds that you can invest in. The catch here is that you can only invest in them through a financial advisor, and because they're private, and you have to have a minimum of $250,000 invested. So this kind of option is not for everyone, But there are these types of opportunities out there. And this bond portfolio, you can choose one that has an environmental focus. You can choose one that is a gender equity focus. And there are other types of focuses that they have. So I'm just trying to give you some examples of what exists. And again, I'm not endorsing any of these products. I'm just giving you examples. Okay, when it comes to public equities, which most of us, I would imagine, are invested in, there are literally thousands of options of values aligned and sustainable investments. And somebody asked earlier about index funds. So I'm in index funds too. And I have some index funds that are not values aligned, and I have some that are, and I'm transitioning the ones that are not into the ones that are. But like many of you, probably, I have had some of my investments for decades. And so I have a lot of capital gains hidden in my stock portfolios. And so I am not really willing to sell them off and take all of those capital gains hits. And so I'm selling them, at least not all at once. So I'm selling them off a little over time, or I'm using market downturns to shift my stock funds from non-values aligned into values aligned holdings. But there are so many options here that it can almost be overwhelming. This is the asset class where we generally hear the terms ESG, for environmental, social, and governance applied. And what you find with these funds is that in many cases, there are rating agencies who actually look at individual companies or who look at stock funds and rate them to tell you how well they're doing on ESG. That's great on the one hand, but it's not so great on the other hand because there's no standards. So every one of these rating agencies actually uses a different approach to the way they rate, to the criteria they use, and to the things that they prioritize. So we are in a process of getting better at all of this stuff. We don't have the perfect solutions today, but we definitely have solutions that are better than many of the traditional investments. So what I do in the book and on the website as well is I point you to tools that help you discern whether companies or stock funds are aligned with your values or not. So there are tools that you can use. Some of them are better than others. Again, nothing is perfect, and figuring this out does take a little bit of work sometimes. However, I'm a huge advocate of learning together, and I have been in investment clubs 3 times in my life, and I really advocate investment clubs to such a degree that we have created a curriculum that goes along with the book and have a chapter in the book on how to start your own investment club and how to run your own investment club. And I'm aligned with another woman who is helping women start and run their own investment clubs. So we think that's a really great way for women to learn. I was in my first club in the early 1990s as a result of a book that came out called The Beardstown Ladies, which some of you might have heard of. Beardstown Ladies were a group of women from the Midwest who started a stock club in the 1980s to teach themselves how to invest in the stock market. And they ended up writing a book about that. And that book launched tens of thousands of stock clubs. So it happened once before, and I'd love to see women do the same thing today with the new information that we have available. This is an example of a very new fund that just came out. It is called the Social Justice All Cap Global ETF. So if any of those words are like Greek to you, the book explains them all. But basically what it means is all cap means that this fund is holding businesses of all sizes, large, medium, and small companies. And there actually are designations that determine what size a company is to fit in one of those categories. It is holding assets both in the United States and in other parts of the world. In fact, it's kind of a 50-50 split between the stocks that it holds that are domestic and the stocks that are international. It has about 800 stocks in this particular fund. And the purpose of the fund is really to invest in companies that are meeting metrics around social justice. This fund was started by an absolutely brilliant woman named Rachel Robichaudi, the company is based here in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And her vision really was to begin to create a way that people could invest in social justice. And not only did she create the fund, but she also created an index, which means that she has created a bar that other fund managers can measure, or you can measure the performance of other funds against this bar to determine whether those funds are social justice or not. Part of what made her approach to this really unique is that she actually worked with social justice organizations to determine the criteria that they were going to use in deciding whether a company was included in the fund or not. So this is really a leading edge kind of investment, but it shows you a little bit about directionally where things are going. And you have tremendous amount of opportunity in the stock market, as I said, to invest your values. And anyone can do that. And you can do it in actively managed funds, index funds, or ETFs. So whoever talked about, I invest in index funds, that's totally fine. You can do your values in index funds too. Okay, so when many of us hear about investing, we hear about the things the asset classes that I just talked about: cash, fixed income, bonds, and the stock market. Everything else, when you talk to a financial advisor, anything else that you invest in is considered an alternative. And this is just a few examples of what some of those other types of investments could be. It also includes things like soy or gold, or it's just virtually anything you want to invest in is considered an alternative. In my book, I call out private investing because I think private investing is a particularly important type of investing, particularly for women. So private investing is when you are investing in a company that is not on the stock market. And a lot of this will happen at early stage. That I'm a private investor. I am an angel investor. I'm doing early stage investing. And you can invest directly in a business. You can do equity investing, which means you own a part of the business. You can do debt investing, which means you are providing a loan to a company. And you can also invest in private equity and debt funds. A lot of this kind of investing requires you to be an accredited investor. And what that means is that you either make $200,000 a year as a single person and have the expectation to continue to make that kind of money, or you make $300,000 or more as a couple, or you have $1 million of net worth, excluding your primary residence. If you meet those criteria, you are an accredited investor and you have more investment opportunities for you. If you don't meet those criteria, you are a non-accredited investor. There are still investment opportunities across these things for non-accredited investors, either through crowdsourcing or through the stock market. So there are ways to invest in these types of alternatives, even as a non-accredited investor. So one of the things that I did as an angel, I like doing things with other people. And so I joined something called the Next Wave Impact Fund. 99 women pooled our assets together. We collected $4.5 million. The ante to get into this particular investment was $10,000 a year for 3 years, or $30,000 minimum. You could invest more if you wanted. And then together, we selected private deals. We did the due diligence on those deals together, and we made investment decisions. There were 10 of us who were the lead investors who did a lot of the decision making. And over the course of 2 years, we invested in 15 companies. So with my $30,000, I am invested in 15 female-led social businesses. And the way that this fund was set up, the 10 of us who are the lead investors created educational opportunities for the other 89 women to teach them how to become angel investors. So someone asked about how you do due diligence on private companies. There's a lot of data out there around how to do diligence. There are references to it in my book and on the website, How to Do Due Diligence. There are a number of different opportunities where for $5,000 to $10,000, you can join groups that will train you to become an angel investor and actually take you through the process of investing as an angel and teach you how to do it. There are also angel clubs that you can join that are female-only angel clubs. There are a lot of angel clubs out there. There are co-ed angel clubs, and there are also female-only angel clubs. And I reference all of this stuff in the book as well. So there are many ways to think about that. To give you one other example of an investment is in water. So I think water is really important. One of the things that I learned when I was working in international development is that a huge percentage of the global population does not have access to clean water or sanitation. And this is particularly challenging for young women around going to school when they're having their periods, around finding a place to go to the bathroom at night where it's safe. I mean, it's a huge issue. So I have invested in a fund that is making loans to microfinance institutions in India and Africa so that women primarily can get access to clean water and to sanitation. And that particular investment should return me somewhere between 6 to 8%, assuming that all goes well each year. So for me, that's a reasonable return for some portion of my portfolio. And I feel great about the fact that my money is potentially helping these women and girls have a better life. So again, just another example of what might be possible in some of these alternatives. So to wrap up, I want to just point you to the resources that I've been talking to. So the book is Activate Your Money. There is a hard copy version and a Kindle version. There's also the website, activateyourmoney.net. The book is written so that at the end of every chapter, there's a take action section. And the website aligns directly to the book, and you can download spreadsheets, templates. There are training videos. There's all kinds of stuff on the website that helps you take the action that's suggested in the book. All the content on the website is absolutely free. There's also a YouTube channel where a lot of these videos, training videos, reside. And as I mentioned earlier, we created a 13-module curriculum that goes along with the book. It is on a platform called Canvas. The website tells you how you can get access to that if you want. And all the content on that is absolutely free as well. And then the organization that I was referring to earlier is called Invest for Better, and they are putting together circles. They do 2 cohorts a year where they bring female leaders together who want to run clubs, and they teach them how to run those clubs, and they have regular meetings of those cohort leaders so the cohort leaders feel like they have a community. My goal and the goal of the women that I'm working with is to create a place where women feel safe, heard, and empowered around their money. So we are building a community of women who are wanting to learn, and we are also building a community of women who are out there to help you learn. The financial advisors who help you invest this way, the women who are building the products that we want, the women who are innovating around angel investing. We're building a community of women. So with that, I will close my comments and open this up to any questions that you might have.
Right, please put your questions in the chat. So Janine, just a question from me. Can you give us an example or two of some of the women that you know have been helped through some of these funds?
Sure. So do you want me to talk about like private companies? Is that what you're asking?
Or a woman, some of the women entrepreneur, like the woman from Atlanta.
Okay, so I'll give you 2. One is an investment that was made through the Next Wave Impact Fund. It was an investment made in a company called Stony Creek Colors. And Stony Creek Colors is a female CEO. And what she has done is she has figured out a process to extract indigo dye naturally from plants. So indigo dye is the stuff that goes in our jeans. It goes probably in my shirt. It goes in some of our food. And much of the way that it is produced is caustic and environmentally unsafe. So this woman has come up with a way to create indigo dye sustainably and from plant matter. So we invested in her. A more local example, and some of you may be familiar with, there is a new bagel shop in the Rockridge neighborhood of Oakland. It's called Boychik Bagels. And the young woman who started that bagel shop was looking to raise loan capital. And so I added some of my money to her loan capital. So I invested in Boychik Bagels. And it took her a year longer to get her bagel shop up and running than she had expected. She opened in November, I think it was November of 2019. 4 months later, 5 months later, COVID happened, the pandemic happened, everything shut down. You would think that she would have gone under, but she didn't. She pivoted hard. She figured out ways to deliver her bagels. She figured out ways to let people come and get them in the backyard of her store. Bottom line, she ended up paying me back in full and all her investors in full a year early. And I did very well on that investment. So those are two very different examples of investments in female CEOs that I feel really good about. I mean, the Stony Creek Color, we haven't exited that investment yet, but I am very confident that we will, and I'm very confident that we will do so at multiples of our investment.
Okay, so we've got, how did your private investments do? You just told us about Boychik.
So that one did really well. So my debt investments, I can give you more information on because they are returning capital to me on an annual basis or a quarterly basis. And the debt instruments that I'm in are generally returning between 6 to 8% per annum, and they're doing well for me. The equity investments, I can't really tell you, because when you invest in equity, you're investing for a much longer time horizon. Your money is usually tied up from 5 to 7 to 10 years or more. And so I'm still waiting to see the exits on those investments. You can sort of track how they're doing, and the investments that I have in equity right now, in equity funds, et cetera, they are going in the right direction, but I can't tell you how they're, at the end of the day, how they're going to do.
Okay, somebody has asked the person next to me how we would find a bank that supports affordable housing.
So what you would do is go to a website called Mighty Deposits and see if you can find something there. Mighty Deposits. It's a great website. The woman behind it, her name is Megan, and she has done a phenomenal job of providing information on all of these values aligned banks around the country. Financial institutions.
Another question, it's not actually a question, but I think it's supposed to be a question. Socially responsible investing for small investors.
Okay, so as I mentioned, how you do that really depends on the asset class you're talking about. So if you're a small investor, one thing you can do right off the bat, move your cash. If you're in the stock market, that's one of the areas that you want to invest. Then, as I was saying earlier, there are all sorts of choices there. And in the book, I explain how to find those choices. If you are wanting to invest in fixed income as a small investor, there are also choices there. If you want to do private deals, then you can go to some of these crowdfunding platforms. And one example is something called Investibule. Investibule has on its platform a number of different crowdsourcing platforms that are doing only socially responsible investing. In some of these cases, you can invest as little as $100 in a private debt or a private equity deal. So there are a number of choices for you if you're a small investor. It really depends on the asset class you're talking about. And that whole piece of what asset classes should you be in, that is a decision that you have to make early on and decide how you want your assets to be allocated. And that is really driven by your goals in terms of return and the time, your lifespan. So there are decisions that you have to make about how you allocate your assets, and those are very important decisions. In fact, some of the financial advisors I've worked with have told me that your asset allocation decisions are actually more important than the actual investment decisions you make in terms of your long-term financial security. So we talk about that in the book too. And that area of planning and thinking about how you should allocate your assets, what types, how much should you have in cash, how much should you have in fixed income, how much should you have in stock, etc. Financial advisors can be really helpful in that area.
Okay, I don't see any more. Let me turn my camera back. I don't see any more questions, Janine. It's been incredibly instructive. Tell us how your book is doing on Amazon. I haven't checked lately.
So it's doing well. When we had our launch party, we had over 200 people who came to the launch party, which was really phenomenal. And we hit bestseller in all 3 categories that the book was listed in. You can only list in 3 categories on Amazon. We hit bestseller in all 3, and we stayed as bestseller for an entire week. And then I'm really happy because I'll show you. Let me see if I can pull this out. So, and then there was this article in Barron's about a week ago, and somebody wrote a review on the 3 best values. Oh, here it is. The 3 best books on sustainable investing. And there it is.
That's great. And someone's asking where we can get the book. I got mine from Mrs. Dalloway's.
You can buy great. You can buy the book anywhere. I actually had a conversation earlier today with an independent books, the man who runs Kepler's, if you're familiar with Kepler's in Menlo Park and Booksmith. I'm a huge advocate of independent bookstores. So you can buy your books through IndieBound online. You can buy your books at bookshop.org and support independent booksellers. You can buy it at virtually any online bookstore, and I think it's in Barnes and Nobles as well in physical form. So, yeah.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, Janine, we can't thank you enough. This has been amazing. And I knew it would be. I talked to her about this talk, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. And she said, when I finish the book. So I didn't forget that. And we were thrilled that we could have you and that the book is doing so well.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you again. And I know there are a lot of people I know couldn't make it tonight, but are looking forward to hearing it on YouTube, which we'll probably post tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Feel free to let me know if you have questions. Go to activateyourmoney.net and you can send any questions that way.
Great. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.